The natural environment surrounding the Pacific, the ocean, the land, and all of its biodiversity, paints the history, story, culture, and way of life of the Pacific people. Similar to the whole of the Pacific, the island nation of Palau, its people and their livelihoods continue to be threatened by climate change. Climate change impacts such as food security, unpredictable weather patterns, and sea level rise have become detrimental to the Palauan society. In December 2012, Super Typhoon Bopha devastated dozens of homes in the eastern coast of Palau. Villagers equipped with traditional knowledge understands that the environment has changed, but has struggled to move their homes inland.
El atol self angaramong ako kim ke kare esel bokla ang yakrol dol etakmul base dan elata ang albuil ma ang albuil se yakrol dol arbela kila arbela hindi alam di kaya sel bokla dol mangya amrat kla dol ko dia kan tukute mela adol kita arbela el alta ngaringi ngakam man nari no bese kamo muful mora atmam la tiar ngarap ta kita play hindi ke waki beo deleng angkor ngak ang ilulo terus ndam dia ang dal atmam menti ta kita kim katit ngil tang okri.
When Super Typhoon Bopha made landfall, much of the eastern coast of Palau, including Paulina's village of Ngaklau, was destroyed. Ocean surges destroyed and flooded homes, while agricultural farms that the village depended on were severely damaged.
El prima masera ser ome mesa ang sigitang mil korte kidel raela au ma pa yu pita madasta klok la mari ndi kay kan utel vila mangarang adim le sul kasi plastic laula marwat tv ki may lotura ko sel ke kare room ay kita dimlo de kimas ndi imles ba amang miles mil ke uspe enya marmay kan utel ay kal se
Villagers were uncertain of how to move forward after the typhoon devastated their communities. But since the tragedy, the government, along with the nations from international partners, have rebuilt homes and provided assistance to the affected families.
Selul desa ka ko amda senga ka mo makaral kire lablik tik maral merenga sa ulare ka kita lingeso mir ka mam.
Although it hasn't been proven that Super Typhoon Bopha was caused by climate change, studies indicate that Palau will see more rainfall days, less frequent storms, and more hot days in the future. Meanwhile, climate change continues to affect lives each day.
As we know, climate change is the global warming as the atmospheric pressure. So how does it affect Palau? Well, basically is when you have a global increase in temperature, you're melting solar caps. And then when you melt solar caps, it really affects the small island states, especially Palau. Because what you have is a sea level rise, and you also have a sea surface temperature because of. And it affects Palau in various ways. It affects our natural resources, our coastal, our infrastructure, and even our health.
Food security is among the key challenges faced by island residents. Saltwater intrusion and sea level rise have affected agricultural farms such as taro patches. Taro is Palau's staple food. It also plays a major role in Palau's customary and traditional practices. It is also sold at local markets, providing income to families.
Kira ladang aklam o mengalam membarang kami jadi close pe el malo market el el do market tarwakal der pelau wapra kamar wako ko kita parti mo spare el time lo ularole la imol sense ko merkama.
Palauans also depend on the ocean for sustenance. However, the marine environment is changing as the sea temperature continues to rise.
It actually surface temperature. A slight increase in the sea surface temperature, affects the corals. Corals are very sensitive to any degree of changes in the water. So when you have this increase, the corals will no longer be able to produce and live. And when they die off, that means the small fish die off. And when the small fish die off, it goes elsewhere. Also, traditionally for us here in Palau, we have known that certain fish associated with certain corals, for example, the Napoleon wrasse or the bumperhead wrasse, they have a certain habitat of corals that they eat and they sleep in it. Now, when the sea surface temperature increase, that means it's going to change the whole biological genetics of the coral community colony. So what happens is these fish will migrate elsewhere. So it just changed the very idea of the thousands of years that our fishermen know. It's going to change the whole system, and that means the fish could swim away or cannot even support them, so they'll die extinct.
Although Palau and the Pacific region have taken major steps in adapting and mitigating climate change impacts, more efforts are needed to address and combat climate change.
Well, locally, we are doing some things. At the national level, you can look at protected areas network is a good example. By better managing our resources, our natural resources, we're actually trying to give them that opportunity, as we say in the climate change arena, the resilience, so they could, better sustain the impact from climate change over a gradual period of time. As well as if you look around the national government building in Gorulmut, you see the hospital, the MOE, you have all of these solar parking panels at the airport. And we're trying to use what we have that's best for the islands, which is the solar, renewable energy. So we're looking at renewable energy, but at the same time we're looking at adaptation to the protected areas network, our food security that we're trying to do. Recently, the Canadian government just funded a seawall project construction at the coast of Yuan. And the interesting part about that is that they're going to use the traditional knowledge of how to make a seawall. So you're actually taking the cultural aspect, connecting with the science and the donors. So we're going to see if our traditional knowledge actually does have responses to climate change.
Palau continuously takes part in sub-regional and regional projects in hopes to introduce adaptation measures aimed towards achieving sustainable development goals.
USP, University of South Pacific, applied for this grant from European Union, and there are three parts for this project. There's capacity building, and there's community engagement, and then applied research. And for the 15 countries in the Pacific, North and South, the community engagement is being implemented in all the countries. And so for Palau, we've identified through rapid assessment the three communities that will be developing the adaptation plan. This is to adapt for the impacts of climate change. And so for Palau, it's Kayang, Ngartmao, and Ngararga.
Although the island nation is involved in a number of projects, both nationally and regionally, small island states such as Palau continue to call on big developed nations to reduce their annual global carbon dioxide emissions.
And one of our biggest efforts that we're trying to do is at the international level is through these climate change negotiations, because at the end of the day we can do only so much for a small island states because we don't really emit that much compared to more of the developed countries. So within these negotiations, what we're trying to do is to find ways where we can actually have them, the big island countries, the Annex 1 countries, the non-Annex 1 countries, is to regulate their behavior so they don't affect us here in the small island states.
In spite of the fact that Palau leads the region in conservation and sustainable development efforts, more efforts are needed to strengthen climate change awareness and education among its people.
When you talk about community awareness, and that is the key element, and that should be our number one priority for small island states, especially Palau. We need to educate our communities, and they need to understand what are the impacts of climate change and how to address it. More recently, Typhoon Bopha was a good example. For years, at the national level, we've been thinking about, maybe the coastal sediments should be relocated. But when Bopha came, and it literally just came to the East Coast, we saw the devastation.
Scientific data indicates that the Pacific, including the island nation of Palau, is in the front line of climate change, but the Pacific only accounts for 0.03% of global carbon dioxide emissions. Although Palau and the Pacific continues to strengthen efforts in addressing climate change, the Pacific region will remain in the front line of climate change and continues to be impacted by its effects today.